This is why your bulk never lasts. You spend months eating in a surplus, pushing heavy weight, watching the scale climb, and then you cut and watch it all disappear, leaving you back where you started, or maybe even smaller than before. The uncomfortable truth is that the most common reason intermediate and advanced lifters lose their gains during cuts has nothing to do with genetics or slow metabolism. Two mistakes working together cause the problem, and those mistakes are excessive caloric surplus during bulking, combined with overly aggressive deficits during cutting. A landmark 2023 study finally proved what many suspected all along, which is that eating big doesn't make you big and just makes you fat instead. Today we're breaking down exactly why this happens, what the research actually says about optimal bulking and cutting, and what the lifters who keep their gains do differently from everyone else. A way to bulk that actually lasts does exist. Most people just aren't doing it. The biggest mistake happens before you ever think about cutting, and it happens during the bulk itself, when you're still feeling good about the scale going up. The eat big to get big philosophy has been around forever, and the logic seems sound on the surface. You need a caloric surplus to build muscle, so a bigger surplus should build more muscle, and that makes intuitive sense. But here's the thing, it's wrong. Eric Helms' lab published a 2023 study in Sports Medicine Open that put this to the test by taking 21 trained lifters and randomizing them into 3 groups, consisting of maintenance calories, a moderate 5% surplus, and a high 15%. Everyone followed the same training program with different food intake. The regression analysis showed strong evidence with a Bayes factor of 14.3 that larger weight gains predict greater fat accumulation rather than muscle growth. The 15% surplus group didn't build more muscle than the 5% surplus group, and the only difference was that they got fatter. That extra fat matters because it creates a longer and more dangerous cutting phase, which is exactly where you lose your gains. A biological rate limit exists for how fast you can build muscle naturally. Alan Aragon developed a model that's widely referenced in sports nutrition literature, and it breaks down by training experience. Beginners in their first year might gain 1 to 1.5% of body weight and muscle per month. Intermediates in years 2 and 3 see that drop to 0.5 to 1%. Advanced lifters with 4 or more years under their belt are looking at just 0.25 to 0.5% of body weight monthly. Real numbers make this clearer. An intermediate lifter at 70 pounds has a maximum muscle gain potential of roughly half a pound to 1 pound per month under optimal conditions. Eating to gain 4 or more pounds monthly means the math becomes brutal, with 75% or more of that gain turning into fat. That's not bulking. That's just getting fat with extra steps. Garth and colleagues ran a 2013 study showing the same thing from a different angle, where a group eating roughly 600 extra calories daily with nutritional guidance gained 5 times more fat than a controlled group. And here's the part that should change how you think about this. There were no significant differences in strength or lean body mass between the groups. All that extra food did nothing for muscle and just made the eventual cut that much harder. The actual optimal surplus, according to current research, sits at 100 to 300 calories per day, or roughly 5 to 10% above maintenance. Weight gain targets should land around 0.25 to 0 of body weight weekly. Anything more and you're accumulating debt that you'll have to pay back later when you cut. Paying back that debt is where most people completely destroy their gains, and the research on this is absolutely clear. Deficit size determines muscle fate. Garth and colleagues ran the landmark study on this in 2011, published in the International Journal of Sport Nutrition and Exercise Metabolism. They compared slow weight loss at 0.7% of body weight per week versus fast weight loss at 1.4% per week in elite athletes, and both groups lost similar total weight with the same protein intake and same training. The outcomes told a completely different story. The slow group actually gained 2.1% lean mass while losing fat, while the fast group showed no change in lean mass at all. Same effort, same discipline, completely different body composition results, all because of the rate of weight loss. Murphy and Kohler published a 2021 meta-analysis in the Scandinavian Journal of Medicine and Science in Sports that quantified this even further by finding that energy deficits of approximately 500 calories per day completely prevented any lean mass gains with an effect size of literally 0. As deficits increased beyond that point, each additional 100 calories of daily deficit drop the lean mass effect size by 0.031 units. Once you exceed 500 calories of deficit, you're not just preventing muscle gain anymore, but actively losing muscle. That finding deserves repeating, because it's the most important thing you'll hear today. Losing weight faster than 0.7% of your body weight per week essentially eliminates the possibility of gaining or even maintaining muscle during a cut. What this means, practically, is that if you dirty bulked and now need to lose 20 pounds, you face a choice. You can crash diet, lose the weight in 8 weeks, and sacrifice a significant portion of your muscle. Or you can take 16 to 20 weeks, lose the same weight, and potentially come out with more muscle than you started with. The dirty bulk is so destructive not just because of the fat you gain, but because of the cutting phase that fat forces you into. One major protective factor exists during a cut, and that's protein intake, but most people get this wrong too. Stuart Phillips's lab at McMaster University ran a study led by Longland in 2016 that put 40 young men in a substantial 40% caloric deficit, which is aggressive by any standard. They split them into 2 groups, with one consuming 2.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, and the other at 1.2 grams per kilogram. The high protein group actually gained lean mass while losing more fat, and the lower protein group lost lean mass. Same deficit, same training, and protein made all the difference. Helms and colleagues established protein needs for cutting athletes in a 2014 systematic review at 2.3 to 3.1 grams per kilogram of fat-free mass, which is substantially higher than maintenance requirements. When you're in a deficit, your body needs more protein to prevent muscle breakdown rather than less. This is another place where intermediate lifters mess up by hitting their deficit and thinking they can coast on the same 1.6 grams per kilogram they used during their bulk. The rules change when you're cutting, and your protein needs go up rather than down. The nutrition side gets most of the attention, but training mistakes are just as destructive and follow a predictable pattern that repeats across gyms everywhere. Dr. Mike Israel of Renaissance Periodization has identified a critical error, which is that lifters slash their training volume when they should be maintaining it. Roth and colleagues published research in 2022 in the European Journal of Applied Physiology, finding that studies increasing resistance training volume during caloric restriction showed better lean mass retention than those decreasing volume. The review specifically notes that reducing volume from the off-season to the weight loss phase conceivably reduces mechanical loading, which in turn may hasten the decrease in lean mass. Cutting your volume during a cut is backwards because you're removing the exact stimulus your body needs to preserve muscle. The second training mistake involves abandoning heavy weights, and you've probably heard the reasoning, where someone says they're cutting so they're doing higher reps for definition. This is fitness mythology that refuses to die. Helms and colleagues' 2015 recommendations for natural bodybuilding state that most repetitions should occur in the 6 to 12 range using 70 to 80% of 1 rep max are nimmoldering and stronger by science confirmed that training load did not meaningfully impact body composition outcomes when dieting. Heavy training isn't detrimental during a cut and is actually necessary. What's encouraging is that the minimum effective dose for maintenance is surprisingly low. Research synthesized by Spearing and colleagues in 2021 found that strength and muscle size can be maintained for up to 32 weeks, with as little as 1 session per week and 1 set per exercise, but only if relative load intensity is maintained. Renaissance periodization guidelines place maintenance volume at approximately 6 sets per muscle group per week, roughly 1/3 of maximum adaptive volume. You can do less volume during a cut, but you cannot do lighter weight. Excessive cardio represents the third training mistake. And while the cardio kills gains thing is overstated, real boundaries do exist. Helms and colleagues recommend that the lowest frequency and duration possible, while achieving sufficient fat loss, should be used. Wilson and colleagues ran a 2012 meta-analysis finding that interference effects become significant with aerobic training 3 or more days per week for over 20 to 30 minutes, and running causes more interference than cycling due to eccentric muscle damage. Doing 45 minutes of treadmill work 5 days a week during your cut means you're actively fighting against your own goals. Something that almost nobody talks about when discussing bulk failures is recovery, and specifically sleep, which turns out to be far more important than most lifters realize. Lemon and colleagues published research in 2021 in Physiological Reports, finding that a single night of total sleep deprivation reduces muscle protein synthesis by 18%, increases cortisol by 21%, and decreases testosterone. Their exact wording describes chronic sleep loss as a potent catabolic stressor. And this is where it gets worse during a cut. Wang and colleagues looked at participants in equated caloric deficits with different sleep conditions, and the sleep-restricted group lost 84.8% of their weight as fat-free mass, compared to only 17.3% in the well-rested group. That finding should stop you in your tracks. Same deficit, same food, and the sleep-deprived group lost nearly 5 times more muscle. Sleep deprivation during a cut essentially guarantees muscle loss regardless of how perfectly you optimize your training and nutrition. Alcohol compounds this problem substantially, with research showing that 1.5 grams per kilogram of alcohol consumed post-workout reduces muscle protein synthesis by 37% even with adequate protein intake. That's approximately 5 to 6 beers for a 70-kilogram man. The reduction in mTOR phosphorylation reached 76% compared to controls. Below 0.5 grams per kilogram appears to have minimal impact, so that establishes a practical threshold if you're going to drink at all. Chronic stress creates a catabolic environment through sustained cortisol elevation as well. Patton Jones and colleagues demonstrated in 2006 that prolonged inactivity combined with hypercortisolemia produces chronic reduction in muscle protein synthesis, and one infusion study found that catabolic hormone elevation increased muscle protein breakdown rate by. You can have your nutrition dialed in perfectly and train optimally, but if you're sleeping 5 hours a night and stressed out of your mind, you're fighting a losing battle. Before you despair about all the gains you may have lost in previous cuts, some encouraging science exists here that should change how you think about temporary setbacks. Christian Gunderson's lab at the University of Oslo has established something remarkable, which is that new mind nuclei acquired during training are not lost during atrophy even after denervation with greater than 50% volume loss. Gunderson's work in the Journal of Experimental Biology explains that a fiber that has previously been large but subsequently lost its mass can regain mass faster than naive fibers. And critically, myonucleon may be stable for at least 15 years in humans and might even be permanent, meaning your previous muscle size is literally remembered at the cellular level. The practical implications are significant across multiple studies. One study found that women regained muscle strength and fiber size during 6 weeks of retraining compared to 20 weeks of initial training. Another documented powerlifters who took a 30-year break, regaining strength significantly faster than novices. A 2024 study confirmed that after a 10-week detraining period, only 5 weeks of retraining was needed to return to previous levels. Greg Nuckols of Stronger by Science puts it this way: when you restrict calories and lose muscle, the amount of myonuclei basically remains constant, which is why losing some muscle while dieting doesn't really matter unless you're prepping for a bodybuilding show. If you've made these mistakes before, you're not starting from zero, but that doesn't mean you should keep making them. The researchers who study this stuff for a living have shared their perspectives directly, and their recommendations are worth hearing. Dr. Eric Helms identifies 2 failure archetypes and describes the first one this way. You've got people who came up reading muscle magazines, and they basically follow a seafood diet where they're eating everything, gaining a lot of weight very quickly with a large part of it being body fat, and very quickly they're running out of room to continue bulking. Dr. Mike Israetel emphasizes patience above everything and says you cannot rush the process. His recommendation is maximum 0.5% body weight gain per week during bulking, and he warns that once you're gaining more than about half a pound per week, most of the extra weight is likely to be fat rather than muscle. Dr. Lane Norton advocates a cyclical approach and explains it this way. He would do 4 to 8 weeks in a surplus, and then 2 or 3 weeks in a deficit, because 2 to 3 weeks of cutting is not enough to really drop your metabolic rate. He points out that anybody who's ever done a long cut knows that you drop easiest right at the beginning. Dr. Brad Schoenfeld clarifies the recomposition debate with an important distinction, which is that you can build muscle while losing body fat, but you can't maximize muscle growth while losing body fat. The consensus is clear across all of them. Smaller surpluses, smaller deficits, longer phases, more patience. Knowing if you're on the right track requires watching for specific warning signs during each phase. During your bulk, stop or recalibrate if your weight gain exceeds 0.5% of body weight weekly, if your waist measurement increases faster than other measurements, if your body fat approaches or exceeds 15%, or if your training performance doesn't improve despite weight gain. That last one matters, because if you're gaining weight but not getting stronger, You're gaining fat rather than functional tissue. During your cut, stop or recalibrate if your 1 rep max is declining significantly, if your weight is dropping but body fat percentage is staying constant, if you're experiencing chronic fatigue and poor sleep quality, if you're having binge eating episodes, or if you're consistently losing more than 1% of body weight weekly. Spearing's research confirms that exercise intensity rather than volume or frequency is the key variable for maintaining physical performance. If your strength is declining during a cut, either your deficit is too aggressive or your recovery is insufficient. Everything we've covered synthesizes into practical recommendations you can apply immediately. For bulking, target a surplus of 100 to 300 calories daily, which is 5 to 10% above maintenance. Aim for 0.25 to 5% body weight gain weekly. Hit protein at 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram daily, distributed across 4 or more meals. Focus on progressive overload as your primary metric rather than scale weight. Plan for duration of 12 to 24 weeks before maintenance or a mini cut, and stop when body fat reaches approximately. For cutting, keep your deficit at 300 to 500 calories daily maximum. Target 0.5 to 0.7% body weight loss weekly. Increase protein to 2.3 to 2.8 grams per kilogram daily. Maintain or slightly increase training volume. Maintain relative intensity at 70 to 85% of your 1 rep max. Limit cardio to the lowest effective dose and prefer cycling over running. Plan for duration of 8 to 12 weeks maximum before a diet break, and take a mandatory maintenance phase as long as you're cut before starting your next bulk, which is the part most people skip. For recovery, get a minimum of 7 to 9 hours of sleep nightly. Keep alcohol below 0.5 grams per kilogram on training days, and separate it from workouts by as much time as possible. Address life stress, and not just training stress, and include deload weeks every 4 to 6 weeks during cuts. Everything comes down to this. The bulk that lasts isn't the aggressive one that produces dramatic short-term scale changes. The bulk that lasts is the conservative one that produces only 2 to 4 pounds monthly gain, but keeps the muscle to fat ratio favorable enough that the subsequent cut is measured in weeks rather than months, with minimal muscle sacrifice along the way. That 2023 study finding no hypertrophy difference between 5% and 15% surpluses, while the larger surplus produced substantially more fat, represents the most important takeaway for any intermediate or advanced lifter. You're not leaving gains on the table by eating less. You're setting yourself up to actually keep the gains you make. The optimal pattern involves 16 to 24-week lean bulks at 100 to 300 calories above maintenance, followed by 8 to 12-week cuts at 300 to 500 calories below maintenance, with mandatory maintenance phases between. Sleep optimization may be as important as nutrition optimization. And thanks to muscle memory, the occasional suboptimal cut doesn't permanently erase years of training because mitonuclei persist for years or decades and allow accelerated regains when conditions improve. If you've been trying to bulk for months and your physique still hasn't changed, this is for you. Most people trying to gain muscle are not lacking effort, they're lacking structure. You can work out 5 days a week, but if your calories, macros, and meals aren't dialed in, you will not grow, period. That's exactly why I built my bulking blueprint. The step-by-step plan that shows you exactly what to eat, how much to eat, how to train, and how to bulk without getting fat. And listen, if my free videos already help you, imagine what happens when you follow the full system I actually use in real life. Stop guessing and start growing. Click the link in the description right now to unlock the bulking blueprint. Your dream physique starts the moment you take action, and that moment is right now. The lifters who keep their gains do less of everything. Smaller surpluses, smaller deficits, longer phases, more patience. That's the counterintuitive truth. And now you know.